I'll wait for you to get back up there. How's that? Oh, okay. Well, thank you all of you for coming to the Palace Theater tonight, and thank you, Amy, for downtown Gallatin allowing us to use this space. If you haven't been in here before, it really is a lovely space, and we're so happy that y'all are the caretakers and keeping the tradition going on here. And thanks to your board members who are here tonight. I am Rosemary Bates. I'm with the City of Gallatin. I am the Economic Development Director for the City of Gallatin. There was lots of conversation at the City Council about how can we help businesses that may be in a situation where the buildings might need a bit of a facelift or the area might need some monetary infusion to build things up, add amenities, create more of a destination area for the community, the business community. For a little bit of history, there have been grants available for facade repair or new facades and sometimes for signs, but those are traditionally limited to just Main Street downtown programs. They don't apply across the city. So there was a situation that arose that created a lot of conversation about how do we help other businesses in the City of Gallatin get an infusion of money that they can then decide how to improve their immediate area, whether you're the property owner, the business owner, or both. A lot of this was generated by Heather and Jeff at Southwater Manor and what they're trying to do with their district. And I don't know if you've seen the designs for their new addition or their addition, but it's gorgeous. And it really is going to be, I think, a game changer for that area, and a lot of conversation will be generated. And we're happy that you're continuing to invest in Gallatin. We appreciate that. So one of the opportunities we looked at that could fit any pocket of town is what Erica Garrison, an attorney with Bradley Law Firm, is going to share with you. For those of you watching or listening at home, you're not going to see the people, you're not going to see Erica, you're just seeing the slide presentation, much like you do when you're watching a planning commission meeting. So those of you in the audience, as she opens it up for questions, please make sure that she can hear your question. She's going to repeat the question so that the folks at home watching can see. There will also be a recording so that later you can go back and have the information. You can always reach out to my office. I bet you can reach out directly to Erica with the Bradley Law Firm, and happy to answer any questions. It's probably going to sound a little more complicated than it actually is. But again, please, when she's done with the formal part, ask any and all questions you want to ask. This is your time to do so. We can always reach out to you later or follow up with you later, but take advantage of your time here with one of the experts. So I'm going to turn it over to Erica Garrison. Thank you, Erica.
Well, thank you, Rosemary, and welcome, everyone. I hope you're having a good night. I know I stand between you and dinner or you and going home, so I'll be short and brief. I want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you've got questions, feel free to raise your hand, interrupt me. It can be a conversation. So I'm approaching this presentation with the understanding that we've already talked to the city and to the IDB about this on a couple of occasions and explained kind of what a CBID is. However, I know CBID, what is that? Y'all may or may not know what that is. And so I'm happy to go as deep or to be as general as you want, but I'm approaching this with the sense that you might want to do this. You might have some interest in doing this, and I'm going to tell you, if you did have an interest in doing it, how to do it, right? Where do you get started from here? What are the next steps? Because this is very much a process. It very much is something to be successful that you have to have buy-in for, that you have to want to do and make the commitment and have some consensus built, around what your mission is, what you're trying to do, and, a common good and a common benefit for everyone. So with that, I will start the presentation, but again, feel free to interrupt me wherever you'd like. So a CBID, what is a CBID? Who knows what a CBID is in the room right now? Does anybody know? All right, good. So we have some some knowledge of it, but it is a Central Business Improvement District. That's what the acronym stands for. And it is something that is based in state law, and it's essentially a process that allows a district or an area of town to designate itself as a CBID, and then under that state statute, once that process has begun and the city has taken a vote to make this a Central Business Improvement District, it puts in place essentially a self-taxing mechanism where the business owners and the entities that reside in that area agree based on petition, right, or a resolution that they want to put a CBID in place. They agree upon what the money should be used for, what the benefits are, and how the assessment should work. And so a CBID is really a self-help entity that allows you to drive money and funds for a common purpose or a common good that you want to achieve within that district. You can have multiple CBIDs within a city. And there doesn't even have to be continuity within the district. So you can have a couple properties over here and one over here. They don't even necessarily have to be connected, and they can be in the CBID. But the idea has to be that everyone kind of is agreeing upon putting it in place and what the benefits are going to be. Before I talk about questions, let's talk about, where have you seen a CBID before? So how many of you guys have gone to downtown Nashville and walked around and seen people picking up trash? You guys seen that? Or you've seen the people on the scooters scooting around from a safety standpoint. That's because there's a CBID in place in downtown Nashville. There's one in the Gulch. You can find one in a part of Knoxville, in Memphis, in Chattanooga, and you might even see one, for instance, in parts of downtown Franklin. I believe there's a CBID in downtown Franklin, or it may be another type of self-help entity there. But what is common within those areas that you will typically see is you're going to see aesthetic improvements. So you might see plantings, you might see common signage, you might have marketing together to drive people to a certain part of town, or you might have some events that are planned within the district. You might have a farmer's market, you might have a music night, or a, wine down on Main night or something like that. And so that's all typically being driven by the CBID. What we have in downtown Nashville, for instance, is sanitation, parking, cleanup. It can do a lot of different things. So under the statute, you can use CBID funds for marketing. You can use it for design. You can use it for planning purposes if you want to plan what to do in the district. You can use it to construct parking facilities. You can use it to construct daycare facilities. You can use it to acquire property for public improvements. You can use it for security. There's a host of different things that you can use it for. But typically, I think if you're thinking about a downtown area, what do you want to use it for? It's marketing. It's beautification. It may be some cleanup or sanitation. It's making sure that you have some uniformity within the area to drive people there. And when we think about it, we also think about, well, how do you pay for that? You guys are probably wondering, what does this mean for me? And so, honestly, a CBID is, I'm not going to play hide the ball. A CBID is another tax that you're essentially putting on yourself, or a fee. It can, under the statute, you can base it on property tax value. So typically it is just part of your property tax bill, and you get taxed on every $100 of assessed value, and it's another, 10 cents on that, or another 15 cents on that. You can also base it on, frontage. You can base it on the business types. You can base it on the benefit that people are receiving. There are different ways that you can base it, but typically you see it just as an add-on to the property tax that's assessed. And again, anyone who's paying that should be in the beneficially impacted area. So there has to be some rationale that everyone is receiving a benefit in the area, and that everyone has had some sign-on for that. So now we're going to talk about questions. So if you're thinking about doing this, I think that oftentimes you should have a consultant, or you can have somebody within your neighborhood that is the driving force behind it, and really helps to get the message out to everyone and build some consensus about why do you want to have this district. Because there's no sense in doing it unless you have a mission or a purpose to accomplish. So like downtown Nashville was sanitation, and safety. That was the driving purpose. At the time, it was really before the Titan Stadium came, and it wasn't safe downtown anymore. You guys might have remembered that at times. You know, it was not a place you wanted to go. It wasn't clean. It wasn't welcoming. And the businesses down there were really struggling. And so they needed to put in place some type of system where everyone was paying into it and everyone benefited from the sanitation and the security. In the Gulch in Nashville, in that part of town, it's parking. There was no parking. And the businesses really couldn't survive without having a common parking entity that provided parking for everyone. And so that was the driving force there. In Memphis, it's marketing and beautification and safety. And so you have to think about why would you want this and what is the driving force? So that's the first question to come up with. And that takes some time, really, to think about what is the mission or the intent and purpose for that. The next question is, once you know what the mission is, then it really helps you figure out what you're going to do next. But it's what services or amenities do you want to provide? So you look through the statute and you figure out, what can I do with this money when I take it in, and what do I want to be doing, and making sure it's tied to your goal. And frankly, it should be realistic based on the mission. I think if you've got a smaller area and you don't want to pay as much, in terms of an assessment, you need to be thinking about, what can I do that's going to have a good bang for the buck, that I'm going to really benefit from and we're going to like. And so in some areas you'll see, it's just going to be flowers on a regular basis and a little bit of marketing, and potentially, there's going to be some signage cohesiveness or something like that. And that can be a benefit in and of itself. And then you're going to think about, once you know, and this is the hard part, but once you know what services you're going to provide or what amenities, then you've got to try to put a price tag on it to figure that out, because it's hard for everyone to understand and buy into it. And you can't get the process started until you know, what is that going to cost? Because you have to articulate that in the ordinance when you go through this process to establish it. And so once you put a price tag on it, then you figure out, the last one, who's willing to pay for it and how much are you willing to pay? So if you create a CBID under the newer act, you can't, it's the 1990 Act for the CBID. If you create a CBID under that act, you actually have the ability to have a longer duration. There's not a temporal time frame for which it expires, but most CBIDs that I've seen are set for a 10 or 20-year period. You can extend them, but then you have a defined time in which you're going to be paying this fee, and then hopefully you will have accomplished your purpose, or you can extend it after that. But that helps you figure out then, once you know the costs and you know who's going to benefit from it, you can then figure out what rate are you going to set and how are you comfortable with that. Do you want to set it based on the property taxes, and the assessed value? Or, are you in an area that has some residential and it has some commercial, and only the commercial properties are going to really benefit from it? So only they want to be paying, or they want to pay a greater rate than the residential. Those are all conversations to have within the community. And I typically suggest, for bigger entities or organizations, find a developer or a consultant. Yes? Well, so what I mean is, sure. So the question is, if a CBID is going to be in place for 10 or 20 years, right, and you can extend it to repay the fee, what does extending it to repay the fee mean? And so what I mean by that is, you have to figure out, for instance, is it a parking structure? Is that parking structure going to cost you, or a parking lot? Is that parking lot going to cost you $100,000, let's say, or $200,000? And then how many properties are going to be in the CBID? And how much are they paying in property taxes now? And how much can you charge them on an annual basis? And then you figure out, based on that property zone, what is that going to generate, right? Based on that rate, or based on what the fee is going to be, how much money does that generate over 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years? And do you get to the $200,000 or the $100,000? That's what I'm talking about. Does that make sense? Yes. Mm-hmm. Sure. So the question was, if homeowners, in addition to commercial property owners, are in a district, I'm summarizing, how do you get the buy-in from the residential homeowners to be comfortable with this? And so I would, honestly, I would say I have rarely seen a CBID that has a lot of residential property in it. But in downtown Nashville and in the Gulch, there is residential property, and they are subject to that. They are paying the exact same rate as everyone else because it's across the board. It's like about 15 cents on every $100 of assessed value. The buy-in comes from the community conversation and what the mission is. So if everybody agrees to the mission, for instance, if it's safety, and safety is a real problem in the neighborhood, in the area, I would presume after significant conversations and back and forth, there could potentially be buy-in from both residential property owners and commercial property owners. Now, the commercial property owners might drive that safety concern more, and so they might be willing to pay a different rate than the residential property owners. Does that make sense? And that is allowed for and provided for in the ordinance. So you can have that flexibility, and you could build that into the plan. Yes. So the next question was whether or not you can pay for the CBID fees through a business license rather than an add-on to the tax bill. Yes, you absolutely can. There are, a number of avenues or ways that you can actually have access to those fees. And so if it was a business license, then you would simply just be charging businesses in the area, and they would be paying X for the license, or it could be based on, the value of the business, however you wanted to do that. But you could certainly differentiate between entities that receive a business license and those that do not. Yes.
He's wanting to know who administers this, but I thought if y'all are okay with it, we would let Erica, she had 6 slides. So if we would let her finish her slides, I suspect she's going to answer some of these questions. Also, I failed to mention, and I apologize, that for those of you at home listening or watching, we have 3 council members here tonight. Paul Jones, who represents District 1, Todd Alexander, who represents District 3, and Pascal Javant, District 2, excuse me, I got ahead of myself, and Pascal Javant, who represents District 3. So just want to make sure everybody at home understood that there are council people here in the audience too. So they're getting this information as well if you want to reach out to them. But maybe let her finish her slides and then jump in with all those questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, but I'll answer your question right now, and then I'll go forward. So who administers the funds? So typically, under the statute, it would be administered by the city. And so the city could designate a certain entity or individual to oversee and, make sure that those funds are properly managed and dispersed. However, under the 1990 Act, which is what I was referencing, it establishes that you can have a district management corporation, and that's one of the values of that act. So you set up a district management corporation, and that corporation then can oversee and manage the CBID and the funds and the use of the funds, and they would report to the city, on an annual basis, and the city would approve the budget and oversee that, but it would be run by a district management corporation, which would be a nonprofit. And you can establish who sits on the district management corporation, as the statute says. So the statute requires you to have, a representative from the state House of Representatives and the state and your state senator. Those are the 2 members that sit on it automatically, or somebody who is, appointed by them. However, beyond that, you can have property owners. And, that's oftentimes what we see. You'll have property owners that sit on the district management corporation. It's your money. It's your improvements, and you're overseeing it and managing it on a regular basis. And that's really the most successful way that we've seen that. That's how to do that. So if you're thinking about doing this, what do you do? And so that's kind of what I was launching into. So oftentimes, the process for putting a CBID in place, the process that you go through before you actually take the step to file the petition to put the CBID in place is sometimes lengthier and more difficult. And that's a longer process for consensus building than the actual step to put it in place. And so I think the most successful way to do this is if you can if you're in a neighborhood or an area that's considering this, figure out a committee or a couple of leaders in the area that really want to take charge of this and oversee it. That's the most cost-effective way to do it. You can hire a consultant, you could hire a lawyer, you could work with city officials. There are numerous ways that you can do it, but really, I think landowner-driven, so individuals that live in the area and are impacted by the area. If you have a neighborhood organization or a president of a trade the chamber or some other area where it's impacted, if they can take a leadership role and help kind of wrangle everyone through it and lead the education process, that's really the best way to do it. So I always say you've got to work with your neighbors on these things. So it's really important to host meetings like this, where everybody gets in a room and you talk about, do we want to do this? Why do we want to do this? What is the value? What are we trying to achieve? And you get your markers out and you talk about, what do you want to accomplish? And you try to rank your priorities. And then you talk about, in the next meeting, well, once we know what we want to accomplish, how do we get there? And what are the services or the amenities that you want? And then what do they cost? And you come up with the cost and you figure out how are you going to bill for that, within the area. And that is a lengthy process that's going to take some time, but if you do the homework, you'll be very comfortable and confident with it going forward. So these are some of the questions that I suggest that you think through. And then once you've done that, we're going to talk about how do we put it actually in place. So this is the most important piece. It's the landowner petition. There are two ways to put a CBID in place. You can put it in place first through a resolution that's filed by the city. And then after that, you would go through a public hearing process once the resolution is filed. But I never advise that. So I don't even have that up here. I just have the petition. So the petition is the most important thing. And you figure out what your area, your map is for the impacted area. And you have to have 51% of the property owners representing 2/3 of the assessed value sign the petition. And the petition has to set out what the boundaries are going to be. It sets out exactly what the money's going to be used for, right? What amenities are going to be there, what the cost of that is going to be, what the duration of it is going to be, and what the rate is going to be. And so once that is set out in the petition, that forms the basis for the ordinance. And anyone that signs the petition, once that's filed with the city, even if at a later date people decide, I don't really know if I support this, technically that petition is valid, and that is something that is relied on by the city. And I say that's very important because as a city, you don't want to impose an additional fee or a tax on businesses or property owners unless they really want it, right? And so I think it's very important to actually figure out who wants this and who's willing to do it. And so that's an important concept. So then step 2 is you have, obviously, the public notice. So the public notice goes out to every landowner, and it runs in a newspaper of general circulation for 3 consecutive weeks. After that, you have your public hearing on it. Anyone can come and speak about whether or not they support it or oppose it. But again, if you've put your name on the petition, you can't revoke your name from the petition at that point in time at the public hearing. So once you've had the public hearing, it goes up for a vote. If it passes, then then you have your ordinance that is in place that spells out the benefits and how this is going to work. And in that ordinance, you can also have the district management corporation established. And that's, once that is all done, I will say that you are done, as business owners and property owners in the area, then you are done unless you're sitting on the district management corporation, and then the money will come in and be administered and used for the purposes that were set out in the ordinance. And it cannot be used for anything that's not spelled out in the ordinance. And the rate cannot be increased unless it is changed via the ordinance. So you have to go back through the process to do any of those things. And so if you do put this in place, you can have some confidence that you're going to live with what's in the ordinance until it has been changed through the exact same process that you went through initially. And that's also why I think you need to use a lot of time and thought on the front end to make sure you're very comfortable with that ordinance, because it takes a while to put it in place, and then it is somewhat difficult to change after that. Yes, Rosemary. Okay, so the question was asked, what can be done in the interim between, when the fund for the CBID has built up to a point where the money can actually be used for some of the services? What else can be done? Can the city provide a grant? Can the city provide some type of donation, or can you do fundraising? And the answer to all of those questions is yes, yes, and yes. All of those things can be done. There's no prohibition on that. You just like the city would give a grant to another nonprofit, you could certainly give a grant to this entity, and that happens all the time. Yes. Well, so I think the question was, how did we get to this point, and whose idea was to do a CBID in Gallatin? And I think, from my point, I will say I'm not sure that there is an idea to do a CBID in Gallatin. I think it is a question, and it's something that the city asked us to look at and to talk about how you would do it, or what the benefits would be, or how it would work. I'm not advocating one way or another. I'm just explaining, but I think Rosemary may have some additional background.
Okay. Very transparently, the city council voted to, not unanimously, but the city council, I don't believe it was unanimous, voted to give the developers of the Target store a $1.5 million grant. Typically, they would have chosen a TIF or a pilot or some other way. And it was not, I didn't think it was unanimous. So after that, and that was not something that my agency and board, nor did the IDB endorse. We did not think that was a great idea. The city council thought it was a great idea, and they voted to give the Target developer $1.5 million. Because of that conversation, many of the council people in this room and others who were not here said, well, what are you doing for the other parts of the city? Sorry. And that led a particular councilman to come to my office one of the days right after this conversation. And they said, would you please look into what our options are? And we already were very aware of TIFs, which are tax increment financing, which is usually used for commercial, big area commercial development, and then pilots, which are usually used for industrial development. So I contacted the Bradley Law Firm. They are experts in these areas of incentives and how you can do these things for the community. they hooked me up with Erica, and Erica told us about CBIDs. So we brought that to the council. She did an explanation. She shared it with the Industrial Development Board. The Industrial Development Board could be that nonprofit entity that you use to administer it. However, I think it's a better idea. I think it's a better idea if you find a nonprofit, non-person in your CBID area to administer the grant or the money as objectively and financially responsible as they can. You don't want someone administering or making sure you're following the rules who may be also, I believe, who's also benefiting from getting that money. But you can set up a nonprofit. You could use another nonprofit. There are ways you can find somebody to administer this. And you may have said this, the CBID money can be used to pay for the administration. It can be part-time. And additionally, you want to do a small area for a CBID. This is not something where you want to do all of the west side of Gallatin or the east side of Gallatin or a whole big area, because you're going to run into situations where what you want to do in a specific small area does not apply to the area immediately adjacent to you. One area may want to develop an arts district. The other area may want to develop a more agricultural-oriented district, or one area may want to develop an entertainment district. So did that answer your question? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Are you a taxpayer in the city of Gallatin? Okay. Do you live in the city of Gallatin, have a business in the city of Gallatin? Okay. So let me ask you this. I know your taxpayers' dollars go into a fund and the city decides where that money is going. But if the city pulled out another $1.5 million and said, we're going to give it just to this one block of town that doesn't include you or your business, the CBID allows that money that you are paying to come right back to you and your businesses and your property. It doesn't go to any other part of the city. The only layer of bureaucracy you're adding is two parts. One is the city council does have to approve by ordinance your district, but you are hiring the person who manages it. You are establishing the rules and the process. You can make those as bureaucratic as you want to, or you can make them as simple as you want to. The city does not administer this. A CBID area and everyone who signs up for it determines what their rules and processes are going to be. So you actually are running it and determining what that money will be spent for, and then it just has to meet the criteria. A good question, I think, is so if he had a business and he wanted to do a new sign to comply with the new sign ordinance, or because is maybe a little tired, then does he put in the new sign and get reimbursed, or does he get the money up front to do the sign and the administrator just assures that it is actually done within a time frame?
I think in answer to that question, it would be determined by what you built into the ordinance. So if the ordinance said signage was an aesthetic improvement that was going to be paid for, and it articulated what the cost of that signage would be, then that signage will be paid for, on at whatever time that the funds are there. So there's not a reimbursement. It would just be the use of the funds. Yes, sir. fair. And so the statement was that we need to clarify that the city itself is not going to be coming in and telling business owners, we're going to do a CBID in these 4 districts for these 4 reasons. And that's absolutely correct. This is, I think the purpose of this meeting and the presentation being focused on how to do it, this is to focus on whether or not in this area anyone wants to use this tool. This is a landowner tool. It's a business owner tool. It is a tool to be used by citizens within the community, how you want it, for what you want it to be. And I really think, to be honest, I think the CBID works in a slightly larger area. Not, if you have 2 or 3 properties that are impacted, to be honest, you could probably just band together, in answer to your question, you could probably band together with those property owners and figure out how you're going to pay for whatever you're going to pay for, and you wouldn't necessarily need a CBID. I think the CBID works in a slightly larger area. And, if there is a general consensus, but maybe not everybody buys into it, and you each pool, it's like you're each putting in $500. And, your $500 may be enough to pay for most of the paint and some of the flowers that you want to put up, but it's certainly not going to pay for the flowers and the paint down the street. And so this gives assurance to a business that everybody in there is going to have the same type of improvement done. So you're all going to hold hands together and say, this is the pact that we're making, and we're making it because that helps our money go further, and we feel confident in paying that money and using that money to make these improvements because everybody else is going to be doing the same thing. So you're not going to look around and say, wow, I spent $500 on my site, but everybody else told me they were going to, and then they didn't. And so now I'm sitting here and I'm wondering why I did the improvement. It really is kind of a uniform approach. It's a consistency to kind of overseeing an area and helping it improve and have some amenities that you wouldn't otherwise have. Yes. So the question is it an additional tax, or does it take from the current taxes that are there? So technically it's not a tax, it's a fee. But, semantics, right? It is additional money that's being paid. Absolutely. It is not, you're not going to keep paying the same rate and pull that money off to be used in your district or your area that you want it to be used for. It is a separate fee. Yes. An additional fee. Yes, ma'am. So the question is, what could a CBID cover? So the CBID is, a central business improvement district. It is something that's authorized by state law, and under state law, it can cover a lot of stuff, right? So the things it could cover, you could use CBID funds to cover the acquisition and construction of parking, the acquisition and construction of daycare, marketing. You can use it for a lot of aesthetic improvements and beautification. You can use it for security. You can use it for sanitization. You can use it for planning purposes. You can use it for design purposes to come up with an overarching, open space design or an overarching, new zoning overlay that you want to put here. You can use it for a lot of different things. The fee will be set in place for the duration of the ordinance unless the ordinance is amended to adjust the fee. That's why you have to set in place what the money is going to be used for on the front end and what the costs are to make sure that you've properly adjusted that. Now, if you want it to be raised every year, you could build that into the ordinance. So the question is, if the rate is increased, how is that increased and who drives that, correct? So the rate can only be increased in the same manner that the ordinance was put in place the first time. So the rate would be increased upon petition by all of the members, actually asking the city to increase the rate. So 51% of the property owners, 2/3 of the assessed value. Yes, ma'am. Mhm. So the answer is yes, you're gathering it correctly. But let me restate it for everybody here. So the question is, how does the CBID work? And if you establish an area and you go through the petition process and you have to have 51% of the property owners representing 2/3 of the assessed value, how does that work in terms of the individuals that haven't signed off, right? And, what can we assume about that? So the answer is yes, you can put a petition in place that doesn't have, everyone in that area saying yes, that they want this. But that's up to the city council. So during the public hearing process, if 20 people come in and complain about it and they haven't signed off, and that's 40% of the property owners, then they may not want to put that in place, or they might want to carve people out of it. And that's 100% possible. Yes. The question is, can you be carved out of a CBID if you don't want to be part of it, if you're a homeowner? And the answer is absolutely, you can be. That's obviously, if the petition is on file and it can be approved and the ordinance is sitting before the city council, they will have the public hearing and they have the option to put it in place as is, or they have the option to amend it and take people out. Yes. The question is, could you be carved out of the district before the ordinance goes to the city council? That's an interesting question. You absolutely could be. I think typically how I have seen it is you have the ordinance on file, then people learn about it and they're not happy with it, and they right, they come and testify, and then usually the matter is deferred and amendment goes on the bill, and certain entities are taken out. So the question is whether or not the onus is on the business owners, the property owners that are pushing the CBID to make sure that everyone is comfortable with the district and supportive of the boundaries. And the answer is yes, that's exactly how it should work. Does it always work that way? I don't know. But that is certainly how it should work. And that's the whole point of the good planning and the consensus building on the front end. So that if somebody says to you on the front end, I don't want to be a part of this, I see no value in it, you either convince them of the value and how it's going to work, or you choose to take them out of it. Yes. Yes. Sure. Sure. So the question was, under state law, how do you create a CBID? We've talked about how to do it through a petition process, but I mentioned that there was another way. So I was asked, what is that other way? So under the state statute, there are two ways to initiate a CBID. One is through the petition we talked about. The other one is through a resolution filed by the city. So when the resolution is filed, the issue with that, right, is simply that at that point in time, you don't know who supports it and who opposes it. And so at that point in time, it is much more difficult to know if there's a consensus for this or if there is not. And so you can have a public hearing where lots of people come up and they complain about it, and then you can't put the CBID in place because you don't have 2/3 of the assessed value and 51% of the property owners. When you have the petition, because you can't take your name off of it, you know it qualifies for the CBID if you want to vote on it, and it is legally defensible and you can put it in place, and you've arguably built a lot of consensus through that petition process, so there's no surprises. You've had a lot of these meetings. The resolution, you could just do, whenever you wanted to. You could file that and you would start the clock for the CBID, and that is a much more active public hearing, I would say, than you would otherwise have. Yes, the same requirement both ways, just a different way of doing it. So the question is this a different version of an HOA? It's sort of like that, yes. I mean, it's somewhat akin to that. Yes, that's a fair assessment. But yes, it is somewhat like an HOA, but it's not just for homeowners, right? It's for business owners, and it provides a way to build revenue and use it for, the assessments that you've got there. Correct. So thank you. And I think the question or the statement was, at this point in time, is there a value in the CBID? And is Gallatin ready for this? And is this appropriate for small businesses that might already be struggling? And what is the impact going to be on that? I'm sorry, I'm summarizing somewhat. And the question is, what are you paying the city taxes for? And, I guess my answer would be the things that you're getting through this CBID might be in addition to what your taxes would otherwise be providing. So your taxes are going to provide a baseline. This is for something extra, most likely.
You may already know this, Mr. Binkley, but city taxpayer dollars legally cannot be used to improve private property. So if you're in the CBID area, because it's going through this state-approved process into a nonprofit entity, then that is one way to bring that money back to give you a new front on your building, fix your roof, buy an extra slice of property that normally the city tax dollars couldn't be spent on. So it isn't just the services that the city, as she said, it's for marketing. If you want to add a daycare in that area because it will generate places for employees or customers to drop off their children, there's a lot more this money can be spent on versus the city's ability to spend taxpayer dollars. Does that make sense? I mean, I hear what you're saying, and you're right. There may be parts of town who don't like this idea and aren't ready for it, But there may be parts of town that do like the idea and feel like it will be a benefit, and they want to do the work to make it happen because they've built a consensus in that area. It could be a couple of blocks with 5 property owners and 4 businesses. You know, it doesn't have to be a humongous area like a whole district, like all of District 3 or 2 or 1. So,
Yes. Right. So the question was, number one, that you've done a significant amount of improvements on your property. And so to you, you don't necessarily see a value of a CBID for your particular property. And I think that was a statement. But then your question was, obviously, if a CBID were to go in place and you paid a CBID payment, could you get a reduction on your property taxes? And I would say the property taxes are set out, you know, I mean, that is a statutory constitutional principle that I don't believe that you could get a reduction in your property taxes for the CBID payment. Now, if you wanted to talk about benefit, you know, there's a way that you could set up the CBID where you would either be exempt from the property, from the CBID like we've been talking about, or it could be based on benefit or the type of business, or, you know, there are a number of ways that it could be written where you wouldn't be paying the same amount as somebody else because of, you know, the improvements that you had, the type of business that you have, or something like that, or you could be taken out of it. There are different ways to skin that cat, I would say. So the question is, are there CBIDs in towns that are the same size of Gallatin, and are they successful or have they folded? So the CBIDs that I'm mentioning are the ones that I'm most aware of. I think they're most used in kind of bigger cities with bigger populations, but they're used all over the country. And so there are examples of them working all over the country in small areas and in larger areas. Yes. The question is, if this were to pass, is it based on the property owner or the business? The bill, right, the fee, and who has to acquiesce to it is the property owner, the entity actually owning the property. Yes. Most likely. Most likely. I mean, it could. Yeah. There's one way that you could do it that way. Yeah. Yes. The answer is yes. So the question is, does the CBID run with the land? Just like zoning, CBIDs run with the land. Yes, they do. So the question is, does that mean that the CBID is an irrevocable instrument? Yes, that's what it means for the duration of time that the ordinance sets out, or until there are no debts owed by the CBID. So if there is a loan taken out or some other debt, you can't sunset or expire the CBID. If there is no debt, if there is no money owed, then in that case, you could, of course, go through the legislative process to expire the CBID if you wanted to. So the question was whether or not, if you have a property that is sold and the new owner doesn't like the CBID, whether or not there is a process for that owner to be exempted from the CBID. Sure, that is certainly something you could look at with regards to the boundaries. I would imagine the concern would be whether or not there is significant debt out there and how that's going to be paid for and what the impact on that is going to be and what the commitments are for that debt. But as long as you could maintain those payments, I think that's something the city council could consider. Yes. Yes. So the question is, how can you be bound by the CBID once you've signed the petition, but not bound by it if it's a new property owner? And I think it would be semantic. So the point of the petition is that once you've signed it and it goes to the city council assumes that there is, 67% of the assessed value and 51% of the property owners representing it, and they can rely on that. And you're not able to say, oops, never mind, that was a whole waste of time. We did 3 notices in a public hearing, and I took my name off, so now you guys can't put it in place, right? That's all that is for. If at a later date, you who signed the petition want to be taken out of it, that's a conversation to be had. It is much easier to be taken out of it if there's no debt. If you're paying for things as it goes, it's much easier to revise that than if there's significant debt. That's up to the city council, I think, Yes. Mm-hmm. So the question is, how does a homeowner get comfortable with a seabed? And I think that's a good, valid question, right? And that's something that you have to talk about. If you were ever going to do this, within the area, you'd have to talk about that. It works in Nashville. There are condos in the downtown area and homes in the downtown area, and they pay that. But right. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, And I think that's an open question. You know, it's a question of what's the mission of the CBID, you know, and does the value actually come to fruition? And if it does, then you might actually see it, and they might actually see the value in it. But if it doesn't, they might not. And that's a conversation that you would have about whether or not you think houses and residential should be included, and, you know, what should they pay, if anything? You know, that. Right. Every 4.
And that is, so let's say you're in the CBID, and let's say you contributed, I'm gonna make up money, $10,000. But it took you $20,000 to get a new sign, a new parking lot, and a new roof. You get your benefit, but you're using other people's money, and you're gonna use your benefit. And then you just say, I got my money, I got more than what I put into it, I'm ready to get out. Is that something that needs to be considered when someone's asking to be taken out?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I haven't seen it where people are taken out, right? You know, I mean, to be honest, I've seen it set, and then I have seen the boundaries adjusted, and, you know, in the incremental times when you're thinking about, am I going to re-up the boundary, and what are we going to do with it after the expiration of the 10-year or the 20-year term, you know? And so I think that's, you know, the typical time to assess that. Again, you know, this is legislation. It can be revoked. It can be amended at any point in time under the process. But you have to build consensus for the revocation, just like you built consensus to put it in place, and then it's a legislative action. So can you think about revoking it for somebody? Yes, but it's a process.
This is something the city is letting you know is available. The city could establish an area and draw it and pass a resolution, and you don't really get a lot of input except coming to the public meetings. That's why, to this point, the council appears to have rejected that, because they want the property owners and the business owners in those areas to drive this and determine that this is what will work for them. As she said, they build consensus. They should have that relationship with their neighbors, property owners and business owners, and that's what they should be bringing to the city. I don't see you've got 3 council people here, and I don't want them to say how they might vote, but I do think that they would recognize this is not something the city should mandate. It should be driven by the areas that want the money to do the improvements that will make them more successful and drive more business and drive more customers and people to that area. Oh, no, this is all very new. I think we've been having this discussion within the last 2 to 3 months. This is all brand new, brand new, brand new.
Right. Well, I mean, so the question is, how is the assessment calculated? And then does that change who has to support it? And so what I would say is this is something that's mandated by state law, so you got to comply with the state law, period, end of story. And so the state law says it's landowners and assessed value, and that's what it's based on. It then goes on to say you can pay for these improvements with a special assessment. And there are various ways that you can calculate the special assessment. One of the ways is differentiating among, like, between the type of use or the type of entity it is. So if you wanted to say, we're only putting this assessment on businesses who pay a business license, that would be something that would comply with the statute. Yes.
Yes, but the sales tax increase cannot pay for a new roof, new parking, a daycare center, marketing, new land. It can't pay for a lot of things that would potentially, and it may not fit for you. This may not be something that would ever work for you. Yeah. Are they paying extra taxes for sanitation? They're not paying sanitation taxes if they have a dumpster. They're only paying sanitation if they have the tote thing that you roll out to the street, yeah. A quarter, half a cent, yeah. And you know what? You don't have to do this. I hear your argument. If it doesn't work for you and you don't like it, then don't do a CBID. Don't participate in it. Don't sign the petition. If your property ends up in that drawn out area, then you go to those public hearings and you tell the council, I was never for this, never been for it, take me out, I don't like this. And I would think that the council, I cannot speak for them, I do not vote there, but I would think that the council would listen to you and take you out. Now, they do have to be conscientious about not dropping below that 2/3 of assessed value and 51% of property owners. But if you don't like this idea, don't pursue it. Tell your business neighbors and your business property owners, we don't want this. Let's let somebody else do it. Let some other area of town do it first and see how it works, if they want to pursue it. Pardon, I'm sorry.
So the question is, could you be included in a CBID even if you don't want to be in it? And the answer is technically yes, of course. You know, if you are part of that, you know, part of that group that doesn't support it, and you're, you know, part of the 20% or 30%, absolutely. But this is a public process, and there's a public hearing process. There's all the questions and the work that has to go into it on the beginning, on the front end of it, where you would be able to say, I don't want to be in this. Then there is the public hearing process where you're able to tell your, you know, representative that you don't like this and you don't want it, and you could go speak at the public hearing. I think, you know, I have seen that in the past where businesses have been taken out or entities have been taken out because they don't support it. And so, you know, I think that would be, it depends on how the public process works, but there, you know, there's no guarantee that you would be taken out, but there's also no guarantee that you would be forced to stay in it. That's a public process. Yes, ma'am. So the question is, can you charge an extra fee to a customer for shopping in a CBID? So I haven't looked at that with the exact question of a CBID before, but I will say, we have had other business areas or developments where the question has been analyzed as to whether or not you could have a separate fee that goes to pay for certain things in the CCRs, and we have opined that you can. So I would think that that would be something you could potentially do. I mean, the question is whether or not there's an appetite for that and what would be the impact. But correct. Yeah, totally. So the question is, where does the CBID funding come from? So the CBID funds come from specifically under the state statute, they come from the assessment, right? And the special assessment is determined in the ordinance, and that typically applies to everybody within the district, right? And that is typically included as an additional fee on your property tax bill. And it's typically based on the assessed value that you're already paying, and it's, a very small, minimal, increase to that. It could also be based on something else, but that is typically how you see it. So it's being paid by everybody in that district based on, whatever the rate is in that ordinance. That's absolutely correct. You could have grant money, so if you create a district management corporation to run it and oversee it, and the city says, oh gosh, we want to help give them some seed money and get them started, then under the law, the city could give a donation or a grant to a nonprofit. That could be your district management corporation, and that could be some seed money. Or you could fundraise, or you could go after other grants. Absolutely. But the core purpose and intent of the CBID is obviously the assessment. Yes.
Absolutely, it's open to any area in the city. There has been a lot of interest from a certain section of the South Water Corridor that is very interested in doing something as a group to create a unique district along the South Water Corridor, not necessarily separate from a CBID. So when I'm saying a unique district, a unique shopping area and experience. If they want to pursue this, they could see this as a way to help elevate and fund the growth of that idea and the implementation of that idea. I cannot answer today what will happen after this meeting, because if the city chooses to continue the path of it being driven by the property owners and business owners, then someone around the city will have to put one together and start the process and do theirs, and then we might know where it goes. The challenge right now is if you are a private business, there are really no opportunities for grant funding for you to get a sprinkler system. You're going to expand your business, let's say, but it now means you've got to add sprinkling. That's on you. There's no grant available for that. I will, and Amy, who is in charge of downtown Gallatin, can probably talk about this better. Multiple times the city chamber, downtown Gallatin, have applied year after year for downtown improvement grants. We've never gotten one. Partly because we're in a community that is prosperous. Westmoreland could get one. Gallatin, it's very challenging because they look at those applications and they go, you know, Gallatin's not poor. Gallatin is not distressed. There may be some areas of the city that are blighted or distressed, but generally we're not, so we very often do not. I don't even know the last time we got a downtown improvement grant ever. I don't think we ever have, so. Like what? Can you give me an example of what you're talking about? I'm not aware of any city that you're talking about except Gallatin and the Target, but go ahead. You will have to ask the city council people who voted for that. You will have to ask the city council members who, as I said, my organization, which is governed by a board, and the Gallatin Economic Development Agency. We are a department of the city, but we are governed by a board. My agency, my board, the Industrial Development Board said, this is a slippery slope you're starting down, and we don't think you should do it. We were not in favor of it, but we got tasked with being the entity that put it on the agenda. I know why that was done, but this is not something that I think the city council members who voted for it have opened this door. You would really need to go talk to them and say, wait a minute, you've opened this slippery slope. Why don't you pick an area of Gallatin, dedicate 1.5 million to it like you did the Target? It's probably heresy, but like you did the Target, you would still have to, the money is not going directly to Target. And this is part of the process that I'm a little, okay, I see how we're getting around this, but the Target money when Target has to open for business, be fully stocked and open for business before the developer can get that $1.5 million. That money will go to the Industrial Development Board, which is a separate business nonprofit. It is not part of the city. It has its own business entity. And then that money, because the IDB, Industrial Development Board, is a nonprofit, the city can give them the money. They can then decide where they want to spend it. In this case, they were not in favor of this, but they will be the entity handing over the check or automatic funds transfer to the developer of Target if they meet the criteria of Target opens for business and is fully stocked. That's true. Yes, I agree. So what he is saying is the city is making investments to the areas by doing infrastructure improvement, sidewalks, roads, curb and gutter, drainage improvements. There is also a plan to widen South Water from Smith Street all the way down to the intersection of 109 Airport Road and South Water. It is one of those is close to the right-of-way acquisition phase. but it includes a lot of improvements that will at least aesthetically and traffic-wise make it easier to travel that corridor and then open up those businesses to more potential customers. Correct. Yes, he said most of that's zoned commercial general, which means it's not, they already can go into those areas without a rezoning or, changing a site plan or, a master development plan. So did I repeat that mostly? Okay. The fee is based on what the group putting together the CBID decides it will need for the list of improvements it wants to make happen. So let's say it's a small area, and let's say they want to buy a quarter-acre piece of property to allow for expansion of the businesses. They want new facades, new signs, maybe they need a new roof, maybe they do need additional parking. Then they have to, the group that's putting this together has to go, okay, how much is all this going to cost? And today it's going to cost $100,000. Let's just make up numbers. Then the group has to say, well, there's 5 property owners. Well, to raise $100,000 over 10 years will take this much money divided by 10 years divided by 5 property owners, or 20 years divided by, 100,000 divided by 20 years divided by 5 property owners, plus some fees to business owners on those properties. So the group, by virtue of what it wants to do with the money, determines the amount of money, and then that, in turn, helps determine the amount of property tax increase or business fee that you would have to pay annually to raise that money and pay for those things that that group wants to improve. Well, as she said, it can't. If you can't raise the fees, then you're still responsible for the debt. But again, this is what I go back to. You don't have to do this. Nobody in the city has to do this. But it's working in other parts of the country and in Tennessee, so somewhere someone has determined there is value. Gallatin property and business owners, and we primarily see this as commercial related, not residential related. There's a whole other thing for residential development to access. It's fairly new. I'm not even going to get into that. But y'all may determine it's not viable and you don't want to pursue it. But another part of town may say, we love this idea, we're going to make one happen. We don't know until we get all the information out, get as many questions answered as possible, and then see where the area wants to go or different pockets of the city want to go.
And in answer to your question, if you want that rate to increase, it could increase. You could spell out in the ordinance, it's going to increase by, 0.5%, or it's going to increase by 2% annually, whatever it is. If you think that that's necessary, that could be built in there.
Councilman Javance was saying, if you have another different idea, you don't like the CBID idea, you don't have to pursue it, then call your council person and say, would this work? Would that work? Don't hesitate to share ideas with your council person. Some of them legally may not be an avenue to pursue. Some of them may. There may be a way to get creative. There may be a way to even approach the legislature and say, hey, could we change some laws or create another way to do this? But they're your key on the city council. You really need to be reaching out to them and let them be your voice at the city council to pursue any creative avenue that we may not have thought of. And again, it could be available, it may be illegal, but we can certainly find out really quickly. Is that fair, Councilman Juance? Okay. We have time for 2 more questions. Mr. McCord, you haven't said anything yet.
So the question is whether or not you can combine a CBID, Central Business Improvement District. No. But the question is whether or not you could have a Central Business Improvement District and over or on a portion of that same property also have a tax increment financing district through the IDB where you're going to capture some of that property tax and use that property tax. And the answer is absolutely yes. There is no prohibition that property A can't be covered by a CBID where they make a CBID payment, and then they're also included in a TIF district. And they're paying their property taxes, and those property taxes are essentially being diverted to that area for some type of public improvement as allowed under the statute. And you can actually use the CBID to back check the TIF. If the revenue isn't sufficient from the TIF, from the property taxes to pay for it, you can use the CBID. Yes, absolutely.
Well, you can do a TIF just with the city. You can do one that does not include the county. One more question, but we can stay for a little while to answer individuals. Is there one more question you want to ask before we close out the live feed version? Yes, sir, Mr. Binkley. So he is saying, why didn't the city take the $1.5 million that it is dedicating to the target development and apply that to this kind of process or another program that could provide assistance to small businesses? I am not disagreeing with you. Mm-hmm. That is another, this information or the council's decision about the 1.5 million, that's really a conversation you need to have with the council members who voted for it. And then perhaps they will say, let's find another vehicle to provide an equal amount to small businesses. Then you also will have to have the challenge of who gets that money. And then the council would be deciding who gets that money. Not, He's asking if you could use that 1.5 million to hurry up and pay for the improvements to South Water. And the answer is that is certainly something the city council could have considered then and can consider now. Okay, we're going to wrap this up. I'm trying to respect her time. She's got to drive back to Nashville. Maybe some of you others do. But we're here. You're welcome to answer questions. We can give you her contact information. This will be recorded and available to watch. You can reach out to me, to Erica. We really do appreciate you. These have been great questions, very thoughtful, and thank you for coming. And again, you don't have to do this, but if you like the idea, try to pursue it. Thank you.